like to introduce Doug Anderson, the Executive Director of PERA. He became the director in January of 2016. Before joining PERA, he led an actuarial group for Arthur G. Gallagher and Company that worked with defined benefit plan sponsors all across the country. We, MMRA, has worked with Doug closely over the past 4 years. We had learned to get to know each other, danced a little bit, but now we're partners in going forward. The legislature, our last effort was to successfully improve our cost of living adjustment from a flat 1% increase to a sliding scale of 1% to 1.5%, depending on inflation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Doug.
Okay, thank you, Leonard. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I just want to first express my appreciation to Leonard for inviting me to join you this afternoon and give you an update on PERA and our plan. And it's, I'd say, relatively good news considering how we're comparing to what else is going on out in the world. So I think we have a few slides to share if those are available to put on the screen. And it's really just a few to give you a sense of what's happening with the fund. And you know, the last year has been quite tumultuous. The fund, actually, we measure ourselves on a fiscal year ending June 30th. And when you go back to 2019, the tail end of the year, tail end of the calendar year, which is the first part of our fiscal year, was actually very positive. Good returns for that period of time. And then COVID came along and the market dropped considerably, but fortunately recovered fairly rapidly. So when we look at our measurements, we measure on June 30th of every year. And the way the assets in the fund as of June 30th, 2019, we had $22.4 billion at that time. A year later, as of June 30th, 2020, it was up to $22.6 billion. So the fund actually managed to grow during that period of time. The return on the assets was 4.2%, which is less than what we assume the fund will get. But all things considered for that period of time, I think, you know, I'll take it. Feel pretty positive about it. And since June 30th of 2020, just in this last quarter, the fund has grown another 6% or so. So we're off to a really good start for fiscal year 21. So this is a large plan. This is by far the largest plan in the state when looking in terms of the participants in the plan. So there's 153,700 active members contributing to the plan. They contribute, their employers contribute, and there's close to $1 billion of contributions coming into the plan every year. And we need that because on the other end is the side you're on, 105, nearly 106,000 retirees who are drawing $1.7 billion of benefit payments a year. So there's more money coming out in payments than coming in from contributions, but that's okay. That's expected. We anticipate that. We know that's going to occur, and that's why it's so important with pension funds that assets are built up to a high level in order to be able to manage that gap between money coming in and money coming out. So that's why we have pre-funded the plan. That's why there's $22.6 billion to help make sure that there's always money to meet all the obligations. Now, while it's at $22.6 billion, that's it translates to the fund being about 80% funded. So it's a large asset amount, but when we value what are the liabilities of the fund for all the members, that's closer to $28 billion. So still a fairly significant unfunded liability to reduce. But on a positive note, and this goes back to changes in the 2018 legislative session, there's some changes to put the plan on a better path to sustainability. So if we can pull up the next slide, this shows how we expect the plan to improve moving forward. So looking back just a couple of years ago, back in 2016, the plan was just over 70% funded. It's currently 80% funded, and we expect it to improve by about 1% every year. And so the projected full funding date is 2037. That's when we expect the assets to equal the accrued liabilities. That's called, it's 100% funding ratio. It's called full funding. That's the target we want to hit and be at. And we're on a good path to reach that. Now the path is going to be volatile. It's going to change a lot. Just like this past year, the funding ratio dropped down a lot, came back up. We know it's going to be volatile from year to year, but in the long run, this is the expectation that we expect to achieve. All of which is based on many assumptions. One of them is that the fund will earn 7.5% each year. But fortunately, the State Board of Investment does a great job. In fact, they have one of the best records of any of the public plans across the nation. And they invest fairly aggressively. That's why there's some volatility. But because there's never really a need to immediately sell assets, they can withstand some of that volatility. So we'll see this bounce around a lot, but we expect it to be on a pretty positive path going forward. So what it means for you, first off, is benefit security. You should feel confident that there's a lot of assets available to back up the obligation and the promises that have been made to you. The plan is in a relatively good spot. And furthermore, since we expect the plan to improve, that should enhance your benefit security even more. In terms of post-retirement increases, and if we can go to advance to the next slide, as Leonard said, there was some changes that were made in 2018. And there's been a lot of different approaches over the history of this plan to provide post-retirement increases, or COLAs, to retirees. For a while, it was related to investments. And then for a while, it was a fixed rate depending on the health of the plan. But back in 2018, working with the stakeholder groups, including your group and the board, was a change to try to tie it more closely to actual inflation. Because isn't, after all, that's what we believe the intent of post-retirement increases is to try to be better connected with inflation. And ideally, it would be that simple. It would be like what happens with Social Security, is that they measure it using the Consumer Price Index, and they give that increase every year. With PERA's fund, that's a little more challenging because that's an expensive proposition, and that cannot be achieved at the same time of working to get the plan in a better funded status. So the result was tying the benefit to inflation, the CPI index, but the increase would be 50% of whatever inflation is each year, not less than 1% and not more than 1.5%. So there's a minimum and a maximum. So in 2019, the first year that this new formula applied, the benefit adjustment was 1.4%. So as Leonard pointed out, that's an increase that if this change had not gone through, the increase would have been 1%. And I'll note too that as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any pension plan in the country that managed to see any kind of benefit increase for any group of members. So this is a very unique thing. There's a lot of plans that are challenged. So this was a very unique thing to get a bit of an increase over what was previously there. In 2020, the formula was impacted by the minimum kicking in, and we'll know in about a week what you can expect for 2021, but it's looking very likely that the increase will be 1% again. Inflation is running fairly low. When Social Security makes their announcement, which they usually do around mid-October, that's when you'll know what benefit will be, what the benefit change will be for this plan. So whatever Social Security announces, you take 50% of their benefit, but it can't be less than 1% or more than 1.5%. And so that's the current formula. And it's honestly, it's unlikely to see a significant increase in benefit because the plan, while it's on the path to improve, there's still a lot of work to do to get this plan to be where it should be on the funding status point. It should get to 100%. We need to make some progress towards that. And that's going to take a little bit of a effort to get there. Now, there is a legislative study that was part of the 2018 legislative session about how COLAs are granted. And part of that reason for that study was because of the changes that PERA made and a question of whether other funds should go to an approach like PERA is using. So every fund in the state has a different approach. No one provides less than 1%, and no one provides more than 1.5% except for the PERA Correctional Employees Plan. That's the one exception. But they all do it in a different way. Currently, this plan and the PERA plan are the PERA Correctional Plan are the only two plans that are tied to inflation in some way. So that's a study, and I think Dave may comment on that a little bit further. Beyond that legislative study, PERA does not have any significant legislative effort this year that would affect this plan. The only thing that we are working on related to this plan is that if any employer group leaves the plan, and this is primarily healthcare entities, if a healthcare entity leaves the plan, we're just asking that the law change that they would pay their share of the unfunded liability. And we do that because we don't want them to pass that cost on to either the active members or to you, the retirees, in a way that would inhibit any future increase in your COLA. So it's just what we think is fair. That's probably our only significant effort on this plan this year. So I think that covers the comments that I had to make, and I'm open to questions, or if there's anything else, Lynn, that you would like me to expand on.